Hi, I'm Dan Singley, and I'm a board member of Postpartum Support International, and I'm also a licensed psychologist. And my general focus is men's issues, and within that, I address fatherhood, and my research is on men's perinatal mental health, and so how fathers are involved with their partners and their babies, and how they make the transition from dude to dad, basically. And what I wanted to do was to take some time in this Facebook live chat just to cover some of the basics of what do you really need to know about early fatherhood and paternal perinatal mental health. So one really important thing is, yes, it's a thing. And in fact, there are plenty of men who deal with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, as well as depression, anxiety, mood issues during pregnancy. And so it's not very well known, but in the prevalence, men get about 1 in 10 new father experiences clinically significant symptoms of depression. And for anxiety, most of the research shows that it's between 4 and 16% of dads will experience some kind of anxiety disorder. So generalized anxiety, OCD, post-traumatic stress, these sorts of things. And postpartum, about 4 to 18% of new fathers will experience some sort of anxiety disorder. So if you put it all together, that's a pretty healthy number of dads that are suffering from perinatal mental health difficulties, although they tend not to get much press or much in the way of headlines. And so I wanted to just raise some awareness about this, because one of the reasons why I made that sort of snarky first point I wanted to make is, yes, it's a thing, is there are plenty of myths out there. You know, postpartum mental health is only a function of changes in the body or having hormonal changes. Well, yes, there are changes in the body and hormonal changes involved, but it's also just a huge life shift. And somebody may experience depression, anxiety, substance abuse issues, all these sorts of things as a result of that shift. And one of the other points that I see commonly, because I work almost exclusively with men, is a lot of times the way that we'll express depression looks different than the way we think about it. So, you know, in looking at perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or PMADs as we call them, depression tends to get the most bandwidth in terms of the research as well as what people are looking at in the popular media. And we're not really used to thinking about men as being in a vulnerable position in many ways. And it's even for fairly seasoned clinicians, that can be the case. And one of the things that can be difficult is, A, we don't assess dads, and B, sometimes the way that a dad will express depression or depressive symptoms looks different. So, for example, instead of being, you know, hopeless, weepy, can't get out of bed, these sorts of things, a lot of times a man or a new dad that's experiencing depression will manifest a lot of anger or irritation, easily irritability, and will do a good amount of self-isolating or being withdrawn even when around other people. And it's important to pay attention to that, because it can look like he's just shutting down. That can be that withdrawal. A couple other important symptoms to keep an eye on for men in the perinatal period experiencing depression are an increase in substance use, including alcohol or other drugs, and also more somatic issues, things like headaches, muscle tension, you know, your guts get funny, GI issues like this. And part of the difficulty is, at a time when what a lot of folks are telling the dads, your job is to support your partner, nobody is really telling dad, you need to get support, and you're going to need support. In fact, you're going to need support beyond what your partner can give you. And so at a time when we're all sort of socialized to think of, hey, dad, your job is to be out there, supporting, we're not really thinking about, well, maybe the deal where he's, drinking more than he had been, or he's playing a lot more video games, or holding up, or just seems really irritable. Instead of just, hey, he's being a butthead, it's important to think, well, maybe he's depressed, and then to get to doing some appropriate assessment along those lines. So, Catherine, I see a question. How do those rates change if the mom has experienced postpartum? So, great question. For postpartum depression, the number one risk factor for fathers developing depression is their partner having depression. So I'm going to speak in fairly heterosexist terms here, so I'm talking about male-female couples, but most of the research, that's what it's looked at. When the mom experiences depression, then 50% of the time, so 50% of the time, then the dad gets postpartum depression as well. So pretty much any time that you're working with a mom who's got postpartum depression, there's a 1 in 2 chance that her partner has it as well, and the implications there are fairly dire. I mean, think about if both parents are at home really struggling with mental health difficulties. Now, it can be helpful because when the mom gets to feeling better, that can bring the dad up, but similarly, when the dad starts feeling better, it can also bring the mom's mood up as well. So it's really important to be assessing dads as well as the moms, and how you do that can be the Edinburgh postnatal depression scale has been normed on dads. In fact, it's the only scale that has been. So for those of you out there that are in a position to assess dads or to do some screening, that would be a really good one. Now, turning to some of the ways that we can work with dads to help them take care of themselves, well, I always point to what I think of as the 4 pillars of self-care, and they are diet, exercise, sleep, and social support. And we all know about sleep and what that looks like in the postpartum period. It's also important to recognize that dads need to be looking after their sleep and being part of a partnership where they're looking at, how can we try to spread that around. Folks are aware of, okay, I need to be getting a reasonable exercise and doing some eating okay, but a lot of times the father's self-care is one of the very first aspects that drops off. Because I work with a lot of dads who are coming from a place that goes something like, hey, look, she's the one who's up all night and nipples are sore and she's recovering, and I don't feel like I have the right to go off and do some exercise or like this, and in particular the social support. And it's just as important for mom as it is for dad to be engaging in these kinds of self-care. So a lot of the work that I do with couples that are experiencing perinatal mood or anxiety difficulties is to help them to work together as a team, not just sort of tactically and operationally, what do you do with a new baby, but also how to be partners for each other to make sure that they're both getting their self-care needs met. And what I can tell you is that men tend to be terrible about the social support piece of the self-care. I mean, I'm given to making sweeping sexist generalizations, and they tend to be about men, and they tend to be based on a lot of research. And this is one of them. It's that, particularly in the postpartum period, men are very unlikely to ask for help, in particular mental health help. And then with the social support stuff, back to that withdrawal and isolation thing that can be a symptom of depression, or just, hey, I'm shutting everybody else out and I'm only focusing on my kid and my family at this point. And while it's understandable to want to sort of circle the wagons a bit and, sort of hit baseline with your new family, it is really problematic because it can set a sort of new family culture where the man is just trying to get all of his social support needs met by his partner, and she may or may not be struggling as well. But I see this dynamic play out in an ongoing way where men will see their world shrink down from having friends and activities or hobbies that they do to it's working home, assuming that they work outside of the home. And so I pretty much have to do a sell job periodically on dads to say, look, you can't do that for the same reason that you need to diversify, for example, your stock portfolio. You got to have stocks and bonds and doing this, equity over here, and like you got to be doing this with your social support. You cannot just be trying to do that, trying to just have your partner meet your connection needs. It's not fair. You don't need to be spilling your guts out to everybody and having emotional vomiting necessarily, but you do need to be getting out and investing in other relationships with friends, with family members, with clergy people that matter to you, or whatever. So that's a critically important aspect of self-care that I see falling through the cracks quite a lot with new dads. And as I said before, I also really, really work with the dads to make sure that they see the importance of advocating for their partner, because a lot of moms become very isolated. I mean, pretty much depressed people in general tend to be pretty isolated. And dads and moms, it can't be a one-sided thing. Both of them need to be there as a partnership to support and say, hey, look, it looks like you haven't been getting any kind of exercise. What if you get up and go walk together? Or like, hey, how about you go and, meet up with some of your friends to go have coffee or whatever it is. But a lot of times this socialization where we tend to say, guys, your job is to be there for her and to be there for your baby. Sure. But it's a real disservice to stop there. And we also need to tell them, you got to be there for yourself. You've got to be looking out for how to look after your own needs and working with moms to do the same. Say, like, how can you kind of hold him accountable and hold his feet to the fire to be taking care of himself? So I also wanted to talk about some resources that you can access. I mentioned that I'm on the board of Postpartum Support International, and really enjoyed it. And in so doing, I've become a lot more familiar with some of what we have to offer, and in this case, specifically for the dads. So I facilitate a monthly dads chat. It's a completely anonymous, confidential, dads-only chat where dads from all over the country and sometimes other countries will call in. I'm not looking at it right now, but I think it's the first Monday of the month. If you go on postpartum.net and just search on Dad's Chat, you'll see it. All the information about joining is there. But it's a really nice and fairly unique forum in which dads get together. They call in, I'm there to facilitate, and they talk about their own fatherhood journey. Sometimes it's their partners are experiencing different sorts of issues with mental health. Sometimes it's the dads themselves. Sometimes it's both of them. Back to that 50% postpartum depression statistic. So I definitely encourage those of you who either are partners or dads or work with these folks. Let them know about the Dad's Chat that I facilitate on a monthly basis. It's if you think about it, it's really not very easy for new dads to find other dads to connect with, and in particular ones that are experiencing perinatal mental health difficulties or mood and anxiety issues. And it's a really cool setup. It's very respectful. It's also very genuine, and it's dads only. And that dynamic, I think, really helps the guys to feel like, hey, this is for us, and they can just really be genuine about what they have going on. Another resource that we have available is, of course, the helpline. Everyone knows about the PSI Healthline, but dads, just as well as moms, can call the helpline and get access to the same sorts of resources, local coordinators, information about what's in their area. And I certainly encourage folks to be aware that if you want, you can encourage dads to do that. Something that's fairly exciting that's coming up here in the month of June, PSI co-sponsors International Father's Mental Health Day. So about 3 years ago, one of my colleagues and I, Mark Williams, he's in the UK, and he's a survivor of paternal postpartum depression. He and I founded the first International Father's Mental Health Day. And if you go on postpartum.net, we have a page that's devoted to giving more information about International Father's Mental Health Day, and you can see videos about, Mark's experience, some of the other folks that have been working to put it on. It's going to be June 18th. So it always occurs the day after Father's Day, and we're going to be doing a different Facebook Live chat. That's going to be on our Facebook page, and so that's at Dad's MH Day. So if you go on Facebook and search on at Dad's MH Day, you'll find International Father's Mental Health Day. And so we'll be doing a Facebook chat that's focusing specifically on father's mental health. We're also going to be doing a Twitter chat that day. And if you do the same on Twitter, if you look for at Dad's MH Day, you'll find that. And you can take part. The hashtag is, wait for it, hashtag Dad's MH Day. So these are other resources. Another one that I'm particularly excited about is I just launched a social networking site that is only for dads. And it's called Padre Cadre. And we're still in beta testing right now, but the main pieces of functionality are there. You can check it out if you go to www.padrecadre.com. Again, this is a dad's only thing. I realize it may sound sort of exclusive or sexist or something like this, but this is really coming from a place that, let's face it, a lot of us call this industry maternal child mental health, and turns out we're forgetting somebody when we do that. And so having these spaces that really are focused on dads and saying, hey, we are about you and the dads and so on, I definitely encourage folks to let the people that you work with know about Padre Cadre. It's cool in that you can meet other dads and access resources and information, but you can message other dads and connect with them that way. But we also implemented a geolocation function where you can go in and search on the map and basically find other dads in your community. So this is another way. We're just trying to work to help dads to connect and get together. Well, I guess in terms of resources, those are pretty good ones. We've got more information. If you go to postpartum.net, we've got a page that's specifically broken out for about dad's mental health. And in fact, we just changed the landing page. So if you go to postpartum.net and take a look and you scroll down, you're going to see that we're now highlighting dads. So as a lead up to Father's Day and to International Father's Mental Health Day, for the first time ever, and we're just going to be leaving this going on a go forward basis, it now says, here's information, moms get help, and now there's a button that says resources for dads. And so I'm particularly thrilled to see that, because it helps dads that go to the site to see, like, hey, this is about us. It's not just about the moms. So one question that I was asked to address is, what are some of the top concerns or questions that I see the most? And really, the number one that I see with dads that are having perinatal difficulties is issues in the relationship with their partner. In fact, that statistic, about 50% of the time when there's a depressed mom, then the dad gets depressed. Most of the literature in the area suggests that it's because of how important the relationship with his partner is, that's sort of the mechanism through which that connection happens. And so it's not an accident that a lot of the men that I'm working with, let's face it, we tend to socialize men to be selfless. I'm supposed to be there, I'm supposed to be for other people, I'm this and that. And so a lot of times they'll come to me and say, Doc, I'm doing everything I know to do. I'm trying to, be there and be supportive, but it feels like I keep saying the wrong thing and I'm doing the wrong thing, and we're just getting further and further apart. And the dads really worry about the relationship, and they really, really worry, are we ever going to get back to baseline again? Am I going to feel like I have my wife back, my partner back, that we can be connected again? And it's really threatening and difficult. And one of the key points that I'll go over with them is the importance of listening and of active listening. Because your average guy thinks, if I come to you with some difficulty, like let's say you're somebody who I love and I really want to help and care for, and you come to me and say, I'm struggling, I'm really, really having difficulty. What's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to think, oh, crap, I got to fix this. And so I skip the part where I say, hey, well, tell me some more about that. What do you mean? And how's that playing out? Da-da-da. I'm more like, oh, we'll do this, go here, do that. And that is a way that guys will contribute to that relational disconnect. So I do a lot of work with dads where I slow them back down and say, look, dude, it's not your job to fix this, right? If you have a partner who's super depressed and struggling, there are plenty of things that you can and should do, but it really begins with just being present and listening and asking questions and not getting defensive, not minimizing, not coming up with, the brilliant answer. It's more start with listen and ask open questions and hear that and repeat it back. And a lot of guys are like, yeah, sure, the shrink thinks it's all about just ask questions and let's talk about our feelings and so on. And so fine, I walk into that. It's a professional hazard of mine. But it turns out that tends to be a game changer. Like I get that from dads that'll call back in from multiple months on the dad's chat. They'll be like, hey, doc, that thing you said about, assertive communication and leading with wanting to understand, that really was a game changer. And it's always, gratifying to hear that. Because it really does help to get the relationship back on track. For the dads themselves, some of the, beyond just the relationship, a lot of these dads will themselves be struggling with not feeling connected to their babies. So it's not a Hallmark commercial for them either. And they'll sort of be coming from a place of, I kind of just want my partner back, and the kid, I feel like I can't offer anything, can't do anything. And particularly for dads who have depression or anxiety, they'll really get into a place where they're sort of triangulated and sort of trying to partner with the wife, but they're not feeling as connected. And they tend to have a lot of guilt and shame about not feeling attached to the baby. And so I'll talk with them about, look, men tend to experience things like postpartum depression differently. So, for example, whereas a mom, you do the differential diagnosis between baby blues and major depressive disorder with peripartum onset at a month, at 4 weeks or so. Well, for men, the research shows that the symptoms tend to spike between 3 to 5 months or 4 to 6 months postpartum. And so I'll try to talk with them about, look, part of what's going on with you, this is a marathon, this is not a sprint. And the thing about connecting with your kid, you're gonna sort that out, and it's gonna happen maybe as, developmentally things move along and you're able to sort of see what's going on, and to really be clear about how attachment is starting and the connection that you're making with your kiddo. So yeah, I see the question from Carrie about traumatized dads, and I'll go beyond just their wife's severe PMADs and more towards the trauma of delivery. And a point that I want to make here is it doesn't have to be an atypical delivery. Like it doesn't even, forget something where the mom's life is in danger or even just a C-section. If you think about the conditions for feeling traumatized, it's something is really terrifying to you. You feel out of control. You can't really get out of or change the situation, and you're stuck in it. And I've spoken with a number of fathers who, in the process of a completely normal birth that did not have any complications, the extreme level of anxiety and seeing their partner in so much pain or so much discomfort, and they themselves not having the medical knowledge to know what to do to get in there, this was traumatizing to them. But there's really very little discussion about that. It's in fact one of the topics that we're highlighting this year in International Fathers Mental Health Day, because I see it over and over again. So Carrie, it's a great question that you're asking. However, your average guy doesn't really have the words to say, hey, that was traumatic for me. It a lot of times sound like, that sucked, or something like this. But when you stop and really and develop the relationship and start saying like, hey, how was that? Like, what was that like for you? It can meet the criteria for having a really traumatic experience, or afterwards experiencing acute stress, or in some cases it really developing into full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder. And similarly, the other half of that question was about having a partner who's really suffering from PMAD, somebody, who may have, really, really intense depression, not getting out of bed, or if it progresses into psychosis or needs to go into IOP or even inpatient. Then the trauma that dads can experience there, particularly if this is the first time they're seeing that sort of manifestation of mental health, that's a real thing. And it's generally compounded with now he's really stepping up in terms of what he's got to do as a father and to be involved. And it may be something he wasn't really particularly prepared for. Now, another question is, what about dads? And how can dads be there for their partners that are suffering with postpartum depression? And I mean, back to the point that I made earlier, the number one thing is shut up and listen. I mean, help to access resources, call the helpline, find out about therapists, find out about psychiatrists, what are those? But first, just be there with her. Listen, hear what she has to say. And sometimes if she's not prepared to be that verbal and talk about it for personal or cultural or whatever reasons, just your presence. Be there and be present. A lot of times the guys just simply don't understand that that's doing something. It can feel like the absence of doing something because they're not troubleshooting or solving or fixing. So that's generally the number one thing that dads don't know to do, because they get into tactical operational mode. Well, what's the fix and how do we do this? Or in some cases, they'll just say really, really unhelpful things like, cowgirl up, get over it, or just well-intentioned things like this will pass, it's okay, and so on. But knowing how to help the moms to empower themselves or to advocate for themselves and to not just sort of take over is another way. And it varies a lot in the dynamics of the relationship. In some cases, it's really helpful to follow the mom's lead and sort of empower her to work her way through her recovery. But then there are other times when she may just be paralyzed or feeling trapped and not able to do so. And in those cases, I definitely encourage the dad to, get in there and do that listening and hearing. And from her perspective, what does she need and what would be help? But sometimes it may just be, you got to take her to the appointment, or you got to get her into, sign her up and put the, the computer in front of her and get her into one of the PSI support groups that are online or like this. Some couple of questions. Are dads' rates of mental health issues during and following a NICU stay similar to moms? Really good question, and frankly, I don't know. There isn't as much research literature on the NICU stuff, although the guy that has the triple black belt in this is Chavis Patterson. He's at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and he's done a lot of very focused work on NICU. So I don't actually know about prevalence rates, except that that's a very, very distressed population, and dads tend to be just as distressed about mom when they have a kid in the NICU, particularly when it's extended stay. I wish I had a better answer for you. I'll look that up so I can handle it. I can answer that next time. Rachel, how do you tell dads how to handle or help their partner with postpartum anxiety? The anxiety tends to be even harder in the sense that it tends to be when moms have really intense anxiety and concerns. A lot of times it focuses around safety or fitness to parent or like this, and that can precipitate what's called in the literature maternal gatekeeping. And the gatekeeping looks like if mom has really intense anxiety and dad wants to do things differently, she'll gatekeep and keep him away. And this can make it so that dad's way of talking to her, get over it, and really minimizing the experience that she's having and doing that in an insensitive way can just really, really increase that rift. So when I work with a couple where the mom or the dad has pretty pronounced perinatal anxiety, the very first thing that I do is I normalize it, and I talk about, the fact that we've been evolved to focus on threat. Anxiety is a perfectly normal human experience, and in the perinatal period, of course, it's understandable because babies tend to be so vulnerable. It ramps up our anxiety, and so we're so worried and so sensitive about doing what we can and keeping the baby safe that it's just an exaggerated response of a perfectly normal inclination. But one of the main things that I tell dads is to try to be empathetic and disarming. Instead of saying, no, you're wrong, like, you're off about that, there's no danger there or whatever, it's to try to sort of connect with whatever aspect that she's talking about that's triggering her anxiety that he can connect to. Not to say, hey, you're right about this, but more to say, hey, yeah, I can certainly understand, like, that's really tough. It's really working to empathize in that way, because it can be really threatening and difficult for a dad to see his partner having that experience. And working with him to be able to connect with her about what it feels like instead of getting into this back and forth about what's real and who's right. That's one of the main ways that I try to talk with dads along these lines. All right, so I'm looking at the time here, and I want to make sure that I'm being responsive. Are there any other questions that you have? There's Carrie. God bless you, Carrie. Me putting it out there. Yeah, I did some gatekeeping. It's super common. In fact, talking about this is one of the things that when I do presentations on this, it can sound like I'm being insensitive about moms or anxiety itself. But it's just not the case. It's just a common dynamic. And so Kim's asking, if we explain a drop of hormones and chemical imbalances due from pregnancy, it relates to the pregnancy and birth process. How do we explain a father's cause of effect? And I can't see the rest of the question. But in terms of causes of perinatal mood and anxiety, sort of from an etiological perspective, it's reasonable to say that the biopsychosocial causes for moms are going to be largely the same as the causes for dads. It's a question of sort of degree and extent. So, for example, there are now 4 really solid studies that show that fathers do experience hormonal shifts that nearly identically mirror the ones that moms experience. So, decrease in testosterone, increase in estradiol, increase in vasopressin, and so on. It's just that the amount of the shift for dads tends to be less. Now, there isn't any research that directly links there's one study that shows testosterone changes in new fathers as a predictor of depression, but it's overly reductionistic to say postpartum mood and anxiety issues are a hormonal thing. Hormones are absolutely one aspect of it, but you got to think more broadly about the relational changes, the situational, the operational, and just the adjustment stress that goes along with it. So in terms of the actual causes, there's significantly less research that specifically looks at the dads. But this is one of those big myths that I see out there. In fact, on my website or on my Facebook page, I've gotten several sort of contentious threads where somebody will say, look, men can't have postpartum issues. And well, I respectfully beg to differ. So looking at time, I'm happy to look at some of the other questions and throw in answers to those as best I can. I'm looking at, I want to invite everybody here that's watching to check out the next episode of this Facebook live chat. It's going to be on Tuesday, June the 12th at 9 p.m., and they're going to be discussing Georgia's Climb Out of the Darkness effort and how to join a climb near you. And I definitely encourage you all to get in on a climb out of darkness that's near you. It's a fantastic way to shed light on the struggles and the difficulties, and in plenty of cases the triumphs and the joys and the thriving that can go along with moms and dads who experience perinatal mood and anxiety issues. So I really, really appreciate everyone for tuning in, and to PSI Georgia for having me. I'm always thrilled to be able to talk about early fatherhood and the psychology of fatherhood and mood and anxiety issues. I definitely encourage you to consider some of those resources and show up for International Father's Mental Health Day. So thank you all very, very much, and have a good night.